A decaying facility in America, first designed to tame the Wild West.
There are a lot of strange contraptions in here. I've seen prisons, I've seen torture chambers. This reminds me a little bit of both.
A stately home in Scotland, once embroiled in an audacious plot.
Just kind of walking around, you're always in danger of stepping on a rotted plank or something and plunging to your death.
A subterranean maze in Liverpool with mysterious origins.
It really feels like a labyrinth. You know, like one of those dreams that you just keep running down, there's another corridor and another corridor, and you never get to the end of it.
And a resort on the shores of the Dead Sea, collapsing into the abyss.
When it opened up, just caved in. And we've got many more. They're all over the place.
Decaying relics. Ruins of lost worlds. Sites haunted by the past. Their secrets waiting to be revealed. Near Loch Lomond is the setting for one of the strangest stories of World War II.
What makes this castle so bewitching is how it is almost merged with nature over the years. It's been basically encroached upon by the surrounding woods.
Just to get to it, you've got to climb over a barbed wire fence and fight your way through thorny bushes.
Trespassers have been beguiled by the castle ruin, but it's a place of hidden dangers.
This is a grand place, and it's been consumed by this jungle of a forest. It's a bit like a fairy tale in there. It's all rather beautiful.
But don't let that beauty fool you. This place is derelict and seriously dangerous. There's falling stone from walls in all directions. And that's just the danger that's above you. Below, you can see these holes in the floor, and in some parts, it's caved in completely.
Elsewhere, layers of dirt obscure lethal chasms, a side effect of being open to the elements.
Most places you stand in the building, you can see the sky. There are 3 or 4 floors above you, but they're just gone.
And one of the most striking features is as you walk in, there's this massive beam, presumably from the roof, that is just toppled down into the interior, into the keep of this castle. And it's just kind of stuck in the ground.
An historic castle on the edge of collapse, still standing to tell its story. Today, access to the castle ruin is strictly forbidden. But 80 years ago, it was a safe haven for hundreds of people.
During the Second World War, this was used as a military hospital, but the building is much older than that.
John Carruthers preserves the history of the Loch Lomond region. With special permission, this is the first time he's been allowed inside the grounds.
There's one fireplace, 2 fireplaces. Looks like a spiral stair with a door coming in up there. It must have been a grand place in its day. Such a shambles now.
It has these beautiful, almost Gothic stone walls and spiral staircases. And scattered on the floor are these Victorian-looking metal brackets that were once used for holding up the ceiling.
Just looking at the cast iron beams, which have not yet broken, obviously supported the upper floors. Imagine getting these heavy beams into this place. Quite immense.
Then we find the old entrance room. It's a huge space with a beautiful grand fireplace. This wasn't only built as a place for sick people.
This is Buchanan Castle. It's a name that reverberates in local folklore. because Buchanan is the name of one of Scotland's proud clans.
The clans were very important. North of the Central Belt, they really ruled the roost.
Clans themselves were more like tribes, and to be a member of a clan like the Buchanan clan, you could be Buchanan by blood, or you could be Buchanan by alliance and affiliation.
The clan chiefs were de facto kings of their lands, and they built these castles to rule from.
Here we have basements or cellars, I'm not sure. Massive, massive underbuilding. Maybe that's where they kept the wine.
The Buchanans have a very active history in Scotland, dating back to the 1400s when they make a very risky move to ally with the French against the English, which, was fraught with peril because the English were closer to hand, they had bigger armies, they were always agitating on the frontier, so this could have meant disaster for the Buchanan clan.
But it wasn't the English who left this place in ruin.
Well, Buchanans had been the dominant family, ruled the roost around here for, 700 years? And in the early 1600s, they fell upon hard times. But in addition to that, the 22nd Laird failed to produce a male heir. And for the combination of these effects was that the estate was put on the market.
The Buchanan dynasty was over, and their family home would share its fate. A neighboring clan purchased the land and built the castle that barely stands to this day.
It must have been a wonderful place in its day. I'm sure the great and the good used to frequent Buchanan Castle from time to time, weekend parties and all the rest of it.
The new castle became a house of leisure, but when the Second World War broke out, it was repurposed as a military hospital. And on one evening in 1941, a doctor serving there received an unusual patient.
On May 12th, Dr. J. Gibson Graham was stationed at Buchanan Castle, now called the Dryman Military Hospital. A pilot was brought to him, going by the name of Alfred Horn, who'd injured himself when bailing out of his aircraft over a wheat field.
The doctor noted in his memoir that his patient was a sallow man of good physique, and he spoke good English.
He had a commanding presence. He clearly regarded himself as an important person and expected to be treated likewise.
But something about this German pilot didn't add up.
In the course of his early time in the military hospital, in the ward, there were suspicions amongst his fellow patients that he wasn't just a simple Hauptmann Horn, that there was more to this than met the eye.
After his injuries were seen to, Horn was taken for questioning. There, he revealed his true identity. His name was Rudolf Walter Richard Hess, once second in command of the Third Reich.
Hess joined the Nazi Party very early on and formed a close friendship with a young Adolf Hitler. Some people have called him Hitler's most loyal follower.
But after the Nazis came to power, Hess's influence on the Führer had diminished.
He was a very weak man, and he was being pushed out by more aggressive Nazis like Goering, like Himmler, like Bormann. And so it's been speculated that he flew to Scotland basically to try to win favor with Hitler.
Hess's plan was to meet someone who had influence over the British Prime Minister and broker a peace deal. He was looking for the Duke of Hamilton.
He's met the Duke of Hamilton in receptions in the past, but as it turns out, the Duke of Hamilton has no interest in helping Rudolf Hess. When informed of this plan, he doesn't want to get his hands dirty, refuses to be helpful.
This was a huge blow to Hess. He'd come all this way, risked his life, disobeyed his Führer, only to be given the cold shoulder by the Duke.
With or without the help of the Duke, word reached Churchill that Hess was in Britain. But his offer for peace was ignored.
Churchill says, I don't want to hear from Rudolf Hess. That would look bad. I've committed to fighting these people on the beaches, on the landing grounds, never surrendering. Why do I want to negotiate with this sort of fallen Nazi?
Hess's plan had failed.
At the end of the day, the doctor thought that Hess was not a military prisoner. He was a man with medical problems. He certainly had a distorted image of reality, thinking that he could bring Britain to the negotiating table with himself, just on his own, without any backup.
When the mission is revealed to Hitler, he's aghast, ashamed, baffled, tries to cover it up as long as possible, but the British advertise the news. And so, predictably, Dr. Joseph Goebbels, the head of Nazi propaganda, comes out and totally disowns Hess, says he's crazy, says we have no idea how this happened.
With his mission a failure and his career in ruin, the disgraced Rudolf Hess could only confide in one friend.
Hess told the doctor a fair bit about his life, his private life, his upbringing, etc. I think that the doctor began to become sympathetic, perhaps not quite the right word, but at least understanding of Hess, and a reasonably close relationship was actually formed.
So on May 17th, Hess and Dr. Gibson Graham left Buchanan House and started a new journey to the Tower of London.
Rudolf Hess spent the rest of his life in prison. After the war, Dryman Military Hospital was decommissioned, and the castle fell into disrepair.
It was abandoned after the war. Well, the War Office had it till 1948, and then it was in limbo, and 1954 they took the roof off to avoid paying property tax.
Now, all that's left of Buchanan Castle is an empty shell, waiting to collapse. Set back from the shores of the Dead Sea, decaying structures create a chilling scene.
This place looks like the set of a disaster movie. The roads and bridges are falling down. You see the carcasses of buildings, dead trees, empty swimming pools.
There's empty abandoned shops, roads with holes in them that look like craters from IEDs or bombs. Everything's just falling apart here.
There are security fences, warning signs, whole areas of the town which are off limits.
Has this site in the famously troubled, occupied West Bank been caught up in conflict? It becomes apparent the craters extend well beyond the roadside.
There are huge craters in the ground, some of them even in the middle of the beach.
Your first instinct is to think these must be man-made. They're so regular.
But the warning signs and fences clearly indicate that the danger isn't over.
To go beyond those fences would be like entering a minefield. You just don't know what you'll be stepping onto.
This whole area is in the grip of some powerful forces, but what are they?
Despite the obvious dangers and eerie quiet, these empty remains were built for crowds of people.
You can clearly see the logistics of this place are set up for tourism. There's restaurants, pools, bars, everything you'd want at a nice seaside resort.
We have no electricity today, so the fences are closed, and we'll have to go around the receptions area to go into the beach and pool area. So why don't you follow me? We'll go in.
Dr. Arthur Trotsky is part owner of the Mineral Beach Resort in the occupied West Bank.
This is what's left of the office. It used to be a beautiful modern air-conditioned office. Okay, let's take a look over here. You'll see the restaurant. This was an amphitheater, and we used to have musical performances on the stage. They would actually have the whole theater filled up and chairs and way up there. It was quite beautiful in the evenings, Dead Sea, stars, the wind, the breeze, beautiful.
But the empty and disintegrating structures aren't the only thing that's wrong here. They appear to be set back hundreds of meters from the beach.
Okay, this was the water line right at the end of this bridge here. This was the lifeguard tower, and these umbrellas were right on the beach. That's how high the water was.
The water line has dropped so much that some resort owners physically moved infrastructure to try and stay close to the water.
These dropping water levels kicked off a chain reaction nobody saw coming.
December the 29th, 2014. Arthur was relaxing at Mineral Beach when the peace was suddenly shattered.
I was sitting in a cafe. I heard this loud crash. So I ran out here and I saw this huge sinkhole.
Faced with the dropping water level for many years, now this new phenomenon was threatening the resort.
You see this in the middle of the parking lot, and we've got many more over there. The massage rooms went down into sinkholes. The beach has sinkholes. They're all over the place.
The receding waterline and sinkholes are connected. But the root cause of both phenomena is neither simple nor obvious.
The fast-dropping water level alone isn't why these places are abandoned, but it is part of the story.
South of Mineral Beach in Israel, this entire area is out of bounds to all but a few experts.
From here on, you must follow me exactly to walk on my footprints, okay? Because there are a lot of hazards here, and that's why you must follow me, okay?
Around 400 new sinkholes appear along the shores of the Dead Sea each year.
It's happened to me to find myself in the bottom of a sinkhole, covered by a pile of avalanche above me.
Eli Raz is a geologist and has spent decades studying the causes of these collapses.
The very reason for the sinkhole's appearance is the drop in the level of the Dead Sea, which is a made-man problem. Now, beneath, there is a subterranean salt layer.
The problem here lies with this layer of salt, and it's a byproduct of the Dead Sea's remarkable geology.
This is a rift valley similar to Death Valley in the US or the Great Rift Valley in Africa. It's a place where tectonic plates are pulling apart and the Earth is dropping away, in some cases even below sea level. This is the lowest place you can stand on Earth, and yet underwater it goes down another 1,000 feet.
Gravity then does the rest.
All the water that flows in here carries with it some minerals and salts that it's picked up as it's trickled through the rocks and deserts. But then the sun beats down on the water starts to evaporate, the minerals and salts stay behind. That's the reason the ocean is salty. Things flow into it, but they can't flow out. But this Dead Sea is 10 times as salty as the oceans.
But the sinkholes are a relatively new phenomenon. So why has this high salt content and dropping water level only recently become so dangerous?
As long as the Dead Sea water was high enough, they penetrated to the area and protected the salt layer.
The problem for the Dead Sea is that it depends on a source of water, and that main source of water is the River Jordan. All along the way, water is being taken out for drinking water, for farming, farms in Jordan, farms in Israel, in the occupied West Bank.
The Jordan River is blocked now. There are dams on the Jordan River and other tributaries, and water continuously evaporating, but there is no water coming anymore.
So now, instead of having the water in some kind of balance, we have more water evaporating every year than is coming in. And the difference is dramatic. The Dead Sea is sinking at a rate of almost a meter a year.
As the seawater disappears, groundwater takes its place. This has a devastating impact on the layer of salt under the ground.
When the Dead Sea level is high, that stops fresh groundwater getting to this layer of salt. But when the levels of the Dead Sea receded, this fresh water could now get to this salt and cause it to dissolve. As it dissolved, it left huge hollows in the ground, and it was only a matter of time before the ground above would collapse.
The first sinkhole that I saw appeared in 1981. But since then, the rate of sinkholes appearance accelerated very much. There is no other place upon the Earth where the formation of sinkholes is so rapid.
They have almost cost Ellie his life, but the real cost has come to the tourist industry.
The most remarkable damage is the damage to tourism. The Dead Sea brought here a lot of tourists, and now they cannot access to the seashore.
Ironically, it is the very salt that causes sinkholes to open up that will also save the Dead Sea from drying up entirely.
What's interesting here is the Dead Sea won't ever disappear completely, because as the level gets lower, the salt concentration gets higher, and so the water becomes less likely to evaporate. But the damage has already been done to people's homes and livelihoods.
Hidden in the city of Liverpool is a true engineering mystery.
This is one of the iconic cities of the world, Liverpool. A completely urbanized, built-up area. You'll be really surprised at what you can find under your feet.
Just off the center of Liverpool is this facade that's still standing that's missing the rest of its building.
This facade is the gateway to an underground maze where things don't seem to add up.
These are very complex, convoluted passages. It really feels like a labyrinth. You know, like one of those dreams that you just keep running down, there's another corridor and another corridor, and you never get to the end of it.
You look up and you see that there's ornate structures. There's brickwork that's been finely designed. There's arches. There's something quite grandiose about these, even though it seems dark and dingy at first look.
The dirt and rubble lays in contrast to the elaborate architecture. But artifacts uncovered here begin to reveal these tunnels' surprising past.
There's a whole collection of trinkets that have been found down here that date back over 100 years. Bits of china, bottles, all these signs of a life that was once lived.
A subterranean network, undisturbed for over a century. A time capsule on a grand scale.
This is one of the best-kept secrets in Britain, really. I actually studied in this town and knew nothing about it in the late 90s. It's a secret that was kept for over 100 years.
By the 1800s, international trade had put Liverpool on the map. But not everyone here was prospering.
Liverpool is rapidly expanding and is one of England's largest port cities. It's very bourgeois, business is booming, and the population is expanding.
Edge Hill was one of the poorest of these areas, but it had at least one resident that was doing well for himself, and his name was Joseph Williamson.
Joseph Williamson came to Liverpool when he was 11 to make his fortune.
Joseph Williamson had worked his way up the business ladder, largely through the tobacco trade, and by 1803, he was a very wealthy man. He saw the poverty and suffering of Edge Hill, and he decided to do something about it.
Tom Stapledon is part of a group who have been unraveling the history of these tunnels for over 20 years.
Williamson appears to have perhaps become a philanthropist by default. He was always happy to give a man a day's pay after they'd done a day's work, but he would not give handouts. He was not in the business of handouts to charity.
So one of the early theories about how these tunnels came to be was that he wanted to give people the chance to work for that money, not a freebie. And so he paid people hands-on labor to come and make these tunnels.
Stories of Williamson's philanthropy are legendary, but some think this was a cover to hide the real purpose of his underground chambers.
During Williamson's time, Liverpool was a hotbed of Christian sectarianism and even extremism.
While religious unrest swept Liverpool's streets, Williamson, himself a Protestant, continued digging.
What's strange about these excavations, though, is they're not in some remote location. The tunnels all lead directly to Williamson's house.
We're now in what we are calling a sunken backyard at the back of Williamson's house. And through this bay window here, we're looking into a very large kitchen area in the basement of what was his three-story Georgian house above here.
He lived alone with his wife, so why would you need to have such a big kitchen area just beneath your house? What was the need for that?
It's quite an enormous space, really, for a kitchen, and it contains this wonderful array of 4 cooking ranges, which really was, I suppose, I have to say, a complete mystery and a surprise to us when we uncovered it.
It became a bit of a local legend that Williamson had some type of end-of-days cult going, that he and his followers were seeking to prepare themselves for Armageddon. And the story ran that all this underground construction was so they'd have a refuge.
Williamson's secrecy invited speculation, but rumors of the occult were never proven. And Joseph Williamson took the secret of his tunnels to the grave.
Williamson was busy beavering away with these tunnels until his wife died, and then he started to do less and less, and then himself, he died in 1840, and that's when the tunneling stopped. And so it was from that point onwards that the tunnels sort of disappeared into folklore.
For 150 years, the tunnels lay forgotten under the streets of Liverpool. But in 1999, workers on a building site discovered a hole in the ground.
Under this car park, that area under these 2 parking bays, 14 and 15, is roughly where this big hole in the ground was. It was just big enough to drop a ladder through and for a fairly slim man to squeeze his way through the hole and realize that he was into something important.
So when they actually found the tunnels, it was like stumbling across Atlantis. It opened up a whole underground world, and that was just the tip of the iceberg.
I remember when I arrived here, before any excavation started, I could say there was a pile of rubble from there to there. You could sort of clamber over the top of it for a few yards here, and then beyond that, to the far end, it was literally up to there. You could look along it and maybe see the end, but you couldn't get over it.
The team of amateur archaeologists began removing hundreds of tons of dirt by hand.
After chipping away, they finally found the tunnel floor, but that was just the first level. They found another. This was a multi-leveled tunneling system.
At that time, it was absolutely impossible for anybody to judge just how deep this cellar system might end up being. And it was years and years later before we finally emptied it out and realized the full depth of what we'd discovered.
As the team dug deeper, the true origin story of these tunnels was becoming clear.
As we lowered the spoil level bit by bit in this chamber, it became apparent for the very first time to us what he was doing. He was going to vault over here in his brick arches and then put 2 layers of working cellar above and then 4-story buildings on top of that.
They discovered stone buttresses strong enough to stop the roof from caving in. But that didn't explain why the tunnels were dug in the first place.
However, the team still hadn't reached the bottom. It's only when they went a bit deeper that the purpose was finally revealed.
We discovered this floor here, which consists of 3 large blocks of stone. One over there, the one we're standing on, and one behind.
They're not real rock formations. They've clearly been carved out of the rock.
Beneath Edge Hill is a material prized for its utility: sandstone.
It appears that Williamson was extracting the stone to extend his own states, not only for himself, but for the whole community.
We don't know how much of this went on, but we do know for sure that he donated all of the stone that was needed to build one of the local churches. That's St. Jude's Church, which was just a few hundred yards down the road.
The secret of the Williamsons' tunnels appeared to be solved. But some mysteries about this place might never be explained.
One thing that really intrigues me is that this appeared to be a process that was going on in full swing. They were obviously working on 3 blocks of stone or 4 blocks of stone all at once and then suddenly stopped. And I found that a very intriguing question. We'd love to know answers, but I'm afraid we never will.
Nearly 2 centuries after Joseph Williamson's death, the legend of his tunnels still captures the imagination of Liverpudlians, and the search for the truth continues.
We believe that there are other spaces which are a lot bigger. There's a great tunnel which we know of, and we hope it still exists, and we're having great trouble trying to find it. And we haven't been able to find a way into it yet, but we're determined to find it.
On the southern plains of Wyoming, USA, lies a sinister building designed to tame the untamable.
We're really out in the middle of nowhere. This beautiful country, the Wild West. But here in the midst of all this natural beauty, we also see an outpost of barbed wire and guard towers.
We're looking at a building that sticks out of the prairie like a sore thumb. The walls of this place are built of stone slabs that were quarried from the local bedrock. Very strong, almost impenetrable.
You can imagine cattle and cowboys roaming around on these plains. But this building tells us a whole other story.
How dark that story is starts to become clear once you walk inside.
There's a chamber that looks like some kind of human-sized pressure cooker. And there's all these other strange sorts of contraptions.
One room is particularly creepy. There's not much left in it. There's kind of an ominous hook hanging from the ceiling, a square on the floor, and then a window looking out across the beautiful countryside.
As a soldier in the invasion of Iraq, I saw a lot of prisons and torture chambers, and this place reminds me a little bit of both. I would hate to be inside this thing.
So who was locked up here? And what horror did these walls bear witness to? In the middle of the 19th century, the northern frontier of America was a land of opportunity. But it wasn't for the faint-hearted.
When the frontier was opened, and the only people that would go out there were the people who were foolhardy, brave, or trying to escape from something. The criminals were going out there because there was no law.
It was these people that gave the Wild West its name.
They're used to taking the law into their own hands with quick draws, lynchings, and cash rewards for killings. But there's change on the horizon.
As the 20th century approached, the territory's government hoped to join the Union, and the population was growing weary of Wyoming's wild side.
The problem was that you still had your criminal element, and these people didn't want to live amongst a bunch of lawless criminals.
This is a turning point in history. We're at a crossroads. The West was known for being wild for a reason, but it needed to be tamed.
For their plan to work, something dramatic had to be done. And this site was at the heart of it all, the Wyoming State Penitentiary. Tina Hill is an expert on the history of the building.
Now we're in cell block A. It's our original cell block. All of our cells could be locked and unlocked by the bar called the Johnson bar. When the bar is up, all the cells are locked. Pull the bar down, all the cells are unlocked. The cells are 5 by 7. We would have 2 to a cell. We did not have hot water. It was very cold in A block. We are the only state penitentiary in Wyoming, so we had everyone. This was a minimum, medium, maximum security penitentiary. We had people here for forgery. We had people here for first-degree murder.
And mixed in amongst these ranks were some colorful characters.
One of our most infamous inmates was Bill Carlisle. He was a train robber. He robbed the Union Pacific Railroad 4 different times. He wound up escaping from here, got put in a shirt crate. They put the crate on the train, which is right down the street. He popped out of the crate, robbed the train, and escaped.
Trying to civilize Wyoming's wild element was never going to be easy. Escape attempts were common.
We had a mass escape in 1912. At the time, our penitentiary was surrounded by a wooden stockade. 20 inmates escaped through a hole that they had broken through on the stockade. People were out on the streets shooting at anyone they didn't recognize because they just assumed they're escaped inmates.
Most of the inmates were soon captured, but a few managed to flee the town after a violent encounter.
One resident was shot and killed by the inmates. 4 inmates escaped. 2 of them came back deceased. The other 2 they never found again.
A stone wall was soon built to replace the old wooden stockade. But for some, it was clear that simply locking up violent criminals wasn't enough.
So the prison needed something else to deal with these cowboys. And why not churn something from the past into the future?
Torture and execution were about to become this prison's calling card.
In 1916, the prison expanded. They added a death house where they could house the worst prisoners, those with death sentences, and they could carry out executions. It was a time in U.S. history when executions were on the rise.
While execution was an accepted punishment, the method of killing was open to interpretation.
One of the stranger ways of executing somebody in the American West was the Julian gallows. It was basically a sort of mousetrap self-execution platform.
Designed so that the condemned inmate would start their own execution process, only a few features of the elaborate system remain.
They would slip a noose around their neck and step onto a trapdoor knowing that they would fall through that door and hopefully snap their neck.
By stepping on the platform, a chain reaction was started in the room below. Using water, weights, and pulleys, ultimately it would end in the collapse of the support structure beneath the trapdoor.
His weight would start a bucket of water underneath to start draining out. It would take about a minute to a minute and a half for the bucket of water to empty out. The trapdoor would spring open, the man would fall through, and down he would go.
The Julian gallows that they installed in the prison was poorly designed. There wasn't much distance for the prisoners to drop. More than once, prisoners experienced the hell of not having their neck broken and slowly strangling at the end of the noose.
In total, 9 men were killed using this device. But soon deemed too inhumane, a unique contraption nearby shows how the business of execution was being modernized.
Just as the foundations of the prison are being laid down, eugenics is starting to catch on. This is the idea that we should select who is genetically superior and inferior and eliminate the undesirables to improve the human race. Unfortunately, that dangerous idea coincided with the development of chemical warfare in the First World War. All of this set the context for the development of the gas chamber.
It was an attempt to be more scientific, more clinical. If anything, it was worse than hanging.
Installed in the 1930s, this gas chamber was meant to provide a more humane system.
The inmates were brought in, strapped down by their chest, arms, and legs. Underneath the chair was a pan of sulfuric acid mixed with water. When it was time, the warden would pull this lever, and a cheesecloth sack of cyanide tablets would drop down into the acid. Hydrocyanic acid gas would then be formed. In about 30 seconds, the man was unconscious. 2.5 to 3 minutes, he was dead.
Use of the gas chamber continued until 1965, and all those encountering that fate spent their final days here.
Right now, we're in the bullpen for death row. This is where you would be waiting for your execution. You're in your cell 24 hours a day. If you were behaving, they would allow you to come out here to the bullpen to exercise for an hour. Inmates were up here between 3 months and 1.5 years waiting for their execution.
Imagine living with that psychological burden of knowing your death is on the horizon, the exact date, and there's nothing you can do about it.
In 1981, the frontier prison was deemed outdated and its doors were closed for the final time. Throughout its life, thousands had been incarcerated here, and an unlucky few had paid the ultimate price. While the prison's story ended years ago, the death penalty here still remains.
As long as Wyoming has been able to decide whether or not we were going to have capital punishment, the state of Wyoming has always had capital punishment.
Wyoming is now in the minority.
Death sentences are decided on state by state, and most of the United States have abolished them. As a result, they've fallen 85% over the last 25 years.
We still have so far to go. Liberty and justice for all, it's an aspiration, it's an ideal. What's so frightening for me is that what horrifies us today was seen as perfectly acceptable, even progressive in the past. But what progress have we made when we give anyone the legal right to take the life of another?